All right, well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Addison Webb. I am an iOS developer at Ramsey Solutions down in Brentwood. I just joined them about a month ago. I'm on the EveryDollar team. If you don't know, EveryDollar is a simple budgeting app. Makes it really easy to budget your money, figure out where it's going at the beginning of the month, so you don't have to wonder where it went.
Stupid question. Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey.
Okay.
Ramsey Solutions, yep. So I'm working there now. I'm originally from Michigan, just moved down here for the job. So today I'm going to be talking about CloudKit. Recently Parse shut down, or is announced that they would be shutting down. So tonight I'm going to present CloudKit as an alternative to Parse. Quick raise of hands, does anyone use Parse or currently? Okay, so any of you still looking for a solution for a backend? Okay, cool. So let's just get right in. So first thing to note is pricing. iCloud, CloudKit, and Parse are fairly similar with the way they structure their pricing and their services. Just a quick comparison with the free tiers that are offered. So Apple offers 10 gigabytes of asset storage, 100 megabytes of database storage, 2 gigabytes of data transfer, and they allow 40 requests a second on their initial free tier. So if you were to sign up today, that's what you would get, which is more than enough. Parse offered baseline 20 gigabytes of storage, 20 gigabytes of database, 2 terabytes of transfer, and 30 requests a second. But as I understood it, Parse, that was like free. Anything above that ever was you were gonna be charged for. Is that correct? I couldn't believe that Parse gave that much away for free, because I would imagine that none of you here paid for Parse at all. And so it makes sense that Facebook cut the cord. But iCloud will scale with your app. So with each user you add to your app, iCloud scales with it, so you can use much more resources than what Parse allowed in their free tier. So this is what iCloud will scale to. You can get up to a petabyte of asset storage, 10 terabytes of database storage, 200 terabytes of data transfer, and up to 400 requests a second. So that's crazy.
How many users is that?
So that would be, it stops scaling at 4 million users. So
quite large.
yeah, really, really large. So once you hit that, you can still use all of those resources, but if you start going over that, you don't get more resources per user at that point. So that right there, if you're really thinking big picture and scalability, shows that CloudKit could be a viable alternative for your app. And then similar pricing structure, if you go over that, at any point, if you go over your allotment for the amount of users your app has, very similar pricing structure to Parse and just about anywhere else. 3 cents a gigabyte for asset storage, $3 a gigabyte for database, 10 cents a gigabyte for data transfer. So very similar pricing structure once you go above the free tier, which you would have a very successful app at that point. So let's do a quick comparison. This isn't a great comparison, but gives you a quick idea of how they stack up. CloudKit is different than Parse, but it offers a lot of the same things. So asset storage, push notifications. They have a RESTful API. Not many people know that. It has a dashboard that you can go and visually see your schema and all that, and manage that from a dashboard online. A couple things it doesn't do that Parse does is it doesn't have any sort of local data persistence API, so you're not going to use CloudKit to actually store data on the device. It doesn't currently have server-side code, which I know Parse had like what they called background jobs, where you could run some sort of code or something on their servers. But I'm kind of guessing that with the open source of Swift and kind of how like IBM is pushing to run Swift on the server, that this year we could see server-side background jobs for CloudKit. That's kind of my guess for WWDC this year. So one thing to consider before adopting CloudKit is this thing going to be around? Is Apple actually interested in offering this service? Another thing to consider might be that Apple doesn't have the best reputation for cloud services, so why would I trust them with my data? I found comfort in the fact that Apple is heavily dogfooding this. They use CloudKit for a couple of their largest apps that rely heavily on data syncing. The big two ones are Photos and Notes. But they're using it across most of their apps to do any sort of syncing now. They've been slowly transferring those over. But the big two are Photos and Notes. And for me, those have worked very reliably. I haven't had any issues with them. So I feel pretty comfortable knowing that, and that they're using their own APIs. So what qualifies you to use CloudKit? Well, simple qualification, you have to have an app on one of their app stores using CloudKit. That's it. From there, you might think, well, shoot, I have an Android app, or I have a web app. I can't use it, then I can't get that data out. Well, since they announced the RESTful API last summer, you can. You just have to have the iOS app or the Mac app on the App Store to be able to use that RESTful API. So what is CloudKit? Let's get into a formal definition. CloudKit is a transport technology that provides an interface for you to move your application's data to and from iCloud servers. So as I mentioned, there's no local data persistence. You would have a database on the device, so Core Data or Realm or whatever you're using to persist data on the device, and you're going to use CloudKit to transfer that data to and from the iCloud servers. It's pretty simple. So I'd like to get into the framework now and start talking about some of the classes that you'll interact with on a frequent basis if you decide to adopt this framework. So the first class that we'll get into is CKContainer. So the way that Apple has structured the service is that CKContainers is the entry point into the app. It's how Apple determines your app from someone else's on their servers. So your app has its own container on Apple's servers, and that's how they can tell the difference between your app and someone else's. That container, by default, it's one container per app, but you can configure it to your app to talk to many containers. So if you have several apps that need to grab data from each other, you can do that and configure it. But by default, it's one container per app. Then you have the database. So there is, out of the box, there are two databases, essentially. In that container, there is the public database, and then there's a private database. The public database obviously has data that anyone can go in and view or see. The private database is actually a little bit misleading with the way it's depicted there. It's actually a lot of different private databases for all of your users. Each iCloud user has their own private database. But this is how it looks to your app when it's interacting with the API. Each device would have access to two databases, a public and a private. So CloudKit revolves around records, and the CKRecord class is how you interact with those. So records have a just-in-time schema, and they can store values such as NS strings, NS numbers, NS dates, NS datas, CL locations, CK references, CK assets, and any homogeneous arrays of any of those types. So that's CK records are how you store your structured data inside of CloudKit. And we'll get into some of the verbs in a little bit and how you actually would save a record or fetch a record from the database. Oops. So CKReference. CKReference is the mechanism that CloudKit uses to define relationships between records. Apple suggests that you use back references. So children have references to their parents, and that allows Apple to cascade delete any records that their parents get deleted. So if a parent record gets deleted, it can automatically go in and delete the children records. Okay. And then we have assets. So assets live in actually a different container inside, or container's the wrong word. They live inside a different area inside of your container. So your container has the private database, the public database, and then what they call bulk storage. So any of your photos, videos, any sort of binary information or files would get stored in the bulk storage. The way that you would get access to that is you would store a reference to that CKAsset in your CK record. So CK record would point to the asset in bulk storage. Now let's talk about record zones. So you have your public database and your private database. You can divide those your private database even further and have little sectioned off pieces of data inside of that database called a zone. So you can separate your data out that way. Zones allow for some more powerful interaction with being able to separate out data and then get information about when that data is updated or deleted. It's how Apple allows for Delta downloads, so you can just download any of the data that's new or been updated. And that is not allowed in the public database. You cannot create zones in the public database. So CKSubscription, that's how a CKSubscription allows you to subscribe to changes inside of a particular database or a particular zone. So you can subscribe to changes at the database level where any record that's inserted in that database, no matter the zone, you would get updates for, or you can get more granular and subscribe to a specific zone and only get information about changes in that specific zone.
They don't allow server-side code yet, but this is like more the active side of things.
This is more the active side of things. So you would subscribe to get information about a certain type of record, and then you would get the push notification saying, hey, these certain records have changed or whatever. So that's where you get into the push notifications. Apple doesn't support push notifications like Parse did, where I believe you could just say, hey, push out this notification to my users. It's a little more ambiguous. You can't directly send out a push notification. You have to set up some sort of system to trigger a subscription that would then send out that notification. But it's nice. It doesn't require any setup. So now we've talked about a lot of the nouns. Let's talk about some of the verbs. There's what they call the convenience APIs. And those convenience APIs make it really easy for you to get up and running and start playing with CloudKit. They allow you to easily fetch records, save records, and delete records. So what you do is you have a CKDatabase instance, and you would, these are the methods that you might call to modify records on the server. We can get back to those in a minute.
So can you fetch specific records, or do you have to fetch all and then figure out which ones you want?
No, so with the convenience methods, with the fetch, you have to specify a record. So a record ID, I'm sorry. So you have to say fetch this specific record. You can't just do fetch me all the records and get them all back. Not with the convenience method. We'll get to that in a minute and how we might do that. With the with the save record, that save record would create a record, and then you could save the record IDs if you wanted to use only the convenience APIs, and then say, hey, fetch this record ID. So the more powerful APIs are the NSOperation based APIs. These allow you to queue operations and chain them together. They're much more powerful than the convenience APIs. Once you kind of get past using those convenience APIs, moving on to the NSOperation based APIs is kind of the next logical step. It gives you a lot more power and allows you to do a few more things that you might be trying to do with those convenience methods. So we have the CK fetch record operation, CK modify record operation, and the CK query operation. So CK queries, this is how you would do kind of what you were mentioning, like a fetch all sort of thing. So a CK query allows you to say, give me all the records of this data type, and then you can provide it with predicate as well. So give me the records of all this data type that match this certain condition, and then iCloud will send you back those records that match your query. So this is one way to offload some of the work to the server, kind of as you were mentioning as well, that if you, instead of pulling down all the data onto the device and then filtering that data for what you actually need, this is a way for you to say, hey iCloud, be smart, only give me back what I actually need right now. That's going to save network costs and power costs so you're not sending back all that data over the network. So that's those are all of the nouns and the verbs. So let me show you an example app. So I've been using CloudKit for the past 9 months or so in development of an outdoors application that I've been working on. It's called Explore Michigan. And this application simply lets you find locations in Michigan, outdoor locations that might interest you and that are interesting, that might have certain landmarks or whatever that you haven't seen in Michigan. Michigan's got a lot of cool places, a lot of beautiful lake shores. It's really an awesome place during the summer. So the back end for this is obviously CloudKit. It stores hundreds of records and has assets. You can go in here and see it stores all the photos for these locations, and then all works pretty seamlessly.
Is the data fed by like users, or is this pulled from?
This is all pulled from the public database. So the way I've designed the app is that all this data goes into the public database so that anyone can just download it and access it. So one thing I should mention about the public database is world readable. Anyone can go in and read that data. You don't need like an iCloud account. In order for you to store data in the private database, the user has to be logged in with an iCloud account. And that does count against their data quota. So that's if you store data in the app on their private database, that's not going to count against your data limits.
So if they wanted to, say, add all the places they've been, pictures of their trip to those.
Exactly. If they wanted to add that photo, to remember that trip to wherever, that would count against their data allotment. Now, if you want other people to see that photo, so if you're creating like a photo sharing feature, that's going to have to be uploaded to the public database because other users can't read other users' private databases. So it's a little, that can create some confusion and some difficulty when trying to design a solution like that. That is great. So,
You're saying public is in among users of your app, not
Among-
just like
exactly.
I can come and look at your public.
Among
database.
users of your app, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yep. But the same goes for
But they
like
can't just browse it. Like you're providing the interface for them to find anything in it, right?
exactly, yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, they would still obviously need if you have like with the web API, they still obviously need like an API token and
Yeah.
stuff. So this isn't publicly available. So I wanted just to show you guys that what's possible with iCloud. It's a pretty simple app, but iCloud has made this pretty easy to do. With the CK records being lazily instantiated, you can just write the code and then save the record and upload it to iCloud, and iCloud will just create the schema for you. You don't have to worry about going in. I can't remember how parse worked. I thought that parse you had to go in and manually define the schema beforehand. Is that correct? Yeah, and so this, with iCloud, you don't have to. You can just start coding. You could have a current project and save a record, and boom, it's already on the server. Let me show you the iCloud dashboard for that app. This is where you'll be able to see some things like usage and this is where you'll be able to see some things like usage, and then also monitor like the price, any overages you might be incurring. So it'll help you manage the use of your app a lot better. It's not quite as robust as parse. Parse is really good, but they're continually adding features to the dashboard. Just last summer, they added a lot of this analytics, simple usage statistics of your app to help you with understanding how it's being used and where you're at as far as billing goes. So this is the dashboard. From the dashboard here, I can see all the different record types that I'm storing for this application. I can also view and manage any like security policies. So you can set per record security policies. So you could have records that are like admin only, or for these certain paid users only, and iCloud will enforce that security to where you don't even have to worry about hard coding in variables or whatever into your database. You can also manage your subscriptions from here. And then in the default zone here, you'll see this is the public database. You can go in and look at all the data and edit all the data in your public database. So I can go in here and see all of the lighthouses, for example, that are in my app. And I can go in and edit any of the data if I wanted to, right there in the dashboard.
So how do you get the data there?
So how do you get the data there? That's a good point that you brought up. CloudKit right now doesn't have any sort of import or export features. I'm working on one right now that I might be open sourcing soon. I know that AgileBits, the makers of 1Password, they're coming up with an interesting library that they're going to open source soon, they say. That kind of, it marries the native API and the RESTful API to where you can switch between the two, and that offers some flexibility that might have some impact on being able to import and export. Right now, you either have to enter them in manually on the dashboard here, or you have to create some sort of data entry app. So I have a data entry app that I've gone in and inputted all of this data.
And is that where you get into like sharing containers between apps and stuff?
Yeah. So, because two apps can use the same container, and so you can have like your data entry app input data into and change data in that container, and then your client app go in and pull all of its data from
That's
the same
interesting too,
container.
though, because like not even just from getting the data in and out for consumption, but like if you think about it from an admin perspective, like if you're in like an enterprise
enterprise setting and you want to use CloudKit, or
Yep.
you can have admin app that has
Exactly.
other things.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, there are still some limitations with CloudKit that makes some solutions not immediately obvious. One of those solutions is the fact that there's two environments. So you have the development environment, which is really nice. When you're developing an app and using the CloudKit framework, it automatically will switch back and forth based off your build. So if you're building with the debug flags on it, automatically will use the development database, so you don't have to worry about switching back and forth. But it makes it hard because it does that. It determines whether you're debugging or not somewhere in its framework, and I haven't figured out if there's a way to like switch that to where while you're debugging, you can't just like dynamically switch between the production and the development database. So it makes it sort of hard when you're trying to move data from from development to production.
So there's no way to, I guess, back up all your records.
Right. So that's one thing I've been actively working on right now is backing up records and coming up with an import and export solution. But no, there's not something out of the box, which is not optimal, but I would expect to see that soon. So this is the production side of the dashboard. So let me get to the usage. So here you can see how the app's being used, where you're at in regards to the free limits, and if you've gone over. So on any of these, you can click the limit and see where you're at. Obviously, I'm coming close to my requests per second. I'm not going to be touching hardly any of these, except for some of my in and out. Because I was transferring from development to production the other day. So transferring over hundreds of images at multiple sizes, in and out of databases, knocked it up a little bit. So it makes it really easy to go in and see where you're at, if you make a change, you can see if that's affecting how much data your app's using. Maybe you need to change something to keep yourself under that free limit.
If you hit the limit, does it charge you or it just stops?
It'll automatically charge you. Yep. If there's no, it won't stop. It doesn't. There's no setting that you can do to like make it stop or anything like that. No, it'll just charge you.
I don't remember if Course was the same way.
I don't remember either. I think they automatically charged.
Do the limits, do they reset monthly?
Monthly, yep. So all this is done monthly. So all those limits that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, those are all monthly limits. So
So if you're building an app and you're starting to populate it with data, you probably want to do that a month before and then go live the next month.
Well, okay, so I should rephrase that. The data, so like asset storage, that's consistent. So you get 10 gigabytes at the beginning, you keep 10 gigabytes. But like transfer, like data transfer, yep, that resets. You're right. So you would want to probably strategize and do that the month before, so that when you get that nice big push from an initial launch, you're not going over that first month and paying extra. That's good. Yeah. In the dashboard here is also where you would go in and create any API tokens if you're using that RESTful API. And you can also manage your team and who has access to edit data in the production environment or the development environment.
Does this like play nicely with the developer portal teams? Is that what this is driven off of?
Yep. And then deployment, so it doesn't have any like import-export feature, but as far as moving and migrating over your schema from development to production, they do have a feature to do that. So it makes it a little bit easier when you are trying to migrate a change over in your schema. You don't have to do that manually, but any of the data that goes along with it or changes, you have to do manually. So.
Does that count against your quota for transfers and stuff?
Yep. Yep. So iCloud sees your usage just like it would see anyone else's. So you can see, just like I was showing you here, this usage here, right here, all this data in and out, that was all me a couple days ago making a change and transferring all the assets back over. So that requires uploading them or downloading them to an app from the development side, building the app, installing a production copy of the app on a device on top of the debug version, and then re-uploading it to the production database. So it's quite a manual process. It's not very nice.
WWDC 2016.
We're hoping. I expect Apple's been actively maintaining it. They just added server to server keys, so you can have your server go in and read data off of iCloud. So they're actively working on it, and with them using it for their own apps, it seems like it's something that they're going to be looking to improve quite a bit in the next couple of years. All right. Any other questions?
So you mentioned, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you mentioned that this is kind of not limited. You have, in order to use it, you have to have an app in the App Store, but it is also compatible to the REST API with like Android apps or other, like you could build a website or something
Exactly.
that's powered by it.
Yep. They actually have a JavaScript framework called CloudKit.js.
So the data that's in the public database, nothing special is needed to use that other than like an API token. But if you want your user to have a private database, do they have to have an iCloud account?
They do have to have an iCloud account. So Apple actually thought through that when they created the framework. So if you have data or an application that requires the private account, say like a tasks app, and they're syncing private information, on the web side, they can log in via iCloud. Apple provides an authentication method for you to log in with their iCloud account, and then on that page they offer them a chance to create an app ID. So it's definitely not like your own login page. It's an Apple login page. They allow you to put your logo on it and the name of your app, but they do provide the mechanism if they don't have an account to go ahead and sign up for one. And then they would get
back.
What was that?
You just get like an access token back.
So when a user would sign up for that, they would get all of the base level storage that any other iCloud user would get, like the 5 gigabytes of storage and all that kind of stuff.
So if you store stuff in the user's private database, does that count against their storage limits?
Yeah.
So like if they are up at the 5 gigs and don't have enough space, like they could potentially not be able to use your app without
Exactly.
purchasing
So
your
one thing
storage?
that's important with CloudKit is, since you're dealing with the network, since you have so many factors outside of your control, error handling is key. So if they try to upload a photo and you're trying to save it to their private database and they run out of storage, you're gonna get back an exception from the server saying we can save the photo. So
That's a pretty big difference from other stuff. Your user has to pay Apple to use your app potentially. It's kinda
potentially.
Weird.
Depending on how you design that. So there's a lot of factors with using CloudKit on how you design your applications. So one thing I'm working on implementing right now into that Outdoors app is a photo upload feature. I want to be able to have users share photos with each other in the app, and then also get more photos for those locations that I don't have photos for. And so one of the limitations without not having server-side code is I don't want to be serving up original assets. I don't want to be serving up a 5 megabyte image file to everyone, even when they're just looking at thumbnails. So I need several different sizes to serve up. Well, with no server-side code, I can't have the user upload that and then generate those files on the server. So I have to have the user, when they want to upload it, it generates that on the fly on their device and it uploads all those files. So there's some workarounds to all this stuff, but in the end, it's a pretty powerful solution if you have the ability to work your solution around some of those limits.
Yeah, it seems like even something you might just want to have a separate database. If you don't want to run that issue with the user running out of storage, of like maybe you store all those photos in some other database and just store the strings to access things.
So, there are several people doing interesting work in this space. Like I mentioned, Agile Bits. They have created an iOS framework or a Cocoa framework for using the RESTful API. So they obviously have the iOS app. They have to use the App Store for that, but they also have the Mac app. And up until recently, if you bought it from the Mac App Store, you could use iCloud to sync your 1Password data. And then they just added now if you buy their app outside of the Mac App Store, now you can use it because they've created a framework that uses that RESTful API. That has a lot of connotation or a lot of changes that it could bring to making things a lot easier to work with iCloud. I know I can't wait to get my hands on it. It might allow for easier database switching. You could like switch on the fly instead, because with the CloudKit REST API, you can specify which environment you wanna hit with each call. So that could allow for some much easier transferring of data and stuff like that, as well as easier ways to import and export your data. So.
We have 2 questions. That's right. So Parse had a save eventually kind of command, like if network was down or something like that. Does CloudKit have anything similar?
They don't. No.
Okay.
So that's something you'd have to implement on your own with your local persistence and handling those errors.